The morning I realized the moon had left something inside me. The world felt too quiet for the truth it carried. It was the kind of quiet that follows a storm, branches still dripping, soil breathing, the forest holding its breath as if it, too, was afraid to move. I stood over the wash basin in the rented room above the apothecary, palms braced on either side, forehead tipped to the cool mirror. My reflection was a stranger. Same dark eyes, same mouth stubbornly fighting tremble with line, same faint scar at my brow from childhood. But there was a softness now, a secret glow in the hollow where hunger used to live. It was not joy, not yet. It was awareness. A candle lit deep inside a winter house. I pressed the folded cloth to my lips and bit down to muffle the small, stunned sound that wanted out. No one knocked. No one called my name. In the courtyard below, a cart rattled past, and the apothecary's wife argued with a supplier in the sing-song sharpness of the capital. A rhythm I was learning only because I had nowhere else left to learn from. I steadied my breathing and stared at the thin strip of linen marked with a truth that would soon become a life. My hands shook. There was a bruise at my wrist that hadn't yet faded. Yellow rings circling green souvenirs of a world I tried to leave behind. A child, not just any child. His child. The room swam for a breath. I pressed my temple to the glass to cool the rush. Outside, clouds drifted apart and the sun spilled along the eaves of the tiled roofs, warm, ordinary light. Somewhere a girl laughed. Somewhere a market bell chimed. Somewhere the city dressed itself in white and silver and promised because the Alpha King was to be wed soon. And when kings wed, even the stones pretended joy. I'd heard the whispers long before I reached the capital. I tried to outrun them and failed. He used to marry her, the first love. I didn't know her name. The world always knows a king's name and forgets the names of the girls who stand too near his fire. But it remembered hers because she came from a house the court loved and feared in equal measure. When the wind carried song from the river district, it also carried facts like thorns, a political peace, an old promise, a union that would still the quarrel along the border and make the trade roads open again. Good for the kingdom, the whispers said. Good for everyone. The truth inside me said nothing about trade roads. My knees softened. I sat on the edge of the bed with the care of someone lowering a glass that might crack. The mattress was thin, straw sighing, the coverlet patched in a dozen careful places. I smoothed the fabric for something to do that wasn't thinking. It didn't work. Thoughts arrived anyway, a scatter of birds too loud to quiet. The last night in the mountain pass. The way his breath misted and mingled with mine. The way winter tried to steal my warmth, and he pressed me to his chest and dared it to try. The impossible, gentle edge to his voice when he whispered my name as if it were a prayer he'd never been taught, but somehow knew. The unforgivable morning after, when duty woke before we did. You knew what I was, he'd said, not to me, not really, but to the space just above my left shoulder where kings speak when they wish the truth would shrink. I cannot unmake the war by wanting, and I cannot unmake the night by pretending it didn't happen, I'd answered. He had closed his eyes then, the kind of close that says a man is trying to be made of stone and failing. They will come for me if I don't take what was promised. They already came for me, I had almost said. But I swallowed it because some truths come with teeth, and I had blood enough. He left before sunrise with a kiss that felt like a door gently shutting. Now the door was a wall, and the wall had a name, marriage. I set the linen on the bedside table as if it were something holy. In the silence that followed, every small sound took on shape and weight. The clock in the apothecary's shop clicked like a tiny hammer. A pigeon cooed at the windowsill, bold enough to tilt its head and stare. If I moved too fast, the room swayed. If I held perfectly still, my heart raced as if it could run ahead of the life forming inside me and intercept the danger before it came. I folded my hands over my stomach. "Hello," I whispered, startled by the word. It wasn't rational or wise or anything a parliament of elders would approve. It was simple, desperate, and real. "I don't know how to do this, but I know I won't leave you." The pigeon fluttered away, startled by nothing and everything. I exhaled, a laugh broken in half, a baby. I tried the word on my tongue like a difficult prayer. It returned with an echo I didn't expect. Hope. The city outside my window did not care about my hope. It stepped around it, sang over it, traded coins above it. It cared about the Alpha King's wedding, about banners, about bread, about keeping the peace, about girls' dresses trimmed in silver thread, about men sharpening spears with smiles. The city loved a story it could understand. Once upon a time, he loved her first. It wasn't a lie. He had loved her first. He had told me as much with the shame of someone who knows memory can be a beautiful knife. He had loved her long before the world called him king, and long before the world called me anything at all. And still. There had been a night when the moon hung too low and the path was narrow and the world looked away long enough for a different story to start, a story with my name in it. Even if it was spoken softly, I did not know what that made me now. I knew what it made the child, a truth that could not be buried by stone or ceremony. A loose board creaked beneath my feet as I rose. I rinsed the basin, squeezing the cloth until the water ran clear, then wrung again, methodical, as if I could wring my panic out strand by strand. My hands insisted on small chores the way a body insists on breathing in grief. I hung the cloth to dry and opened the narrow window to let the room fill with cold and the smell of clove from the shop below. The apothecary favored clove for everything, as if a spice could be a shield. I wished it were that simple: buy a jar, brew a tea, keep fear away. The fear had specifics. If he married her, there would be no space left for the shape of me in his life. If I hid the child, I would be hiding half the truth of who they were. If I told the court, they would use us as a lever against him. If I told no one, I would someday have to tell the child why their father's name was a silence. I could not say dot. I touched the sill where worn paint had peeled and counted breaths until my chest loosened dot in the alley below. An old woman bargained for nettle. She had the bright, merciless eyes of someone who has never once forgotten the price of anything. The apothecary's wife argued back with a dignity that had teeth. I wondered what they'd say if they knew. They would not say congratulations. They would not say blessing. They would not say love. They would say complication, scandal, trouble. Words that were armor. Words that could not cradle a heartbeat. I pulled my cloak around my shoulders and slid, my feet into boots still stiff from yesterday's rain. I needed bread. I needed to walk. I needed distance from the way the walls leaned close to hear me think. On the stairs, I passed the apothecary himself, his round face lit by the satisfaction of counting. He nodded without warmth or unkindness, the nod a city gives you when it is willing to pretend you belong so long as you pay in coin and silence. The market smelled like crushed herbs and warm sugar and damp stone. Banners had begun to multiply on lintels and balconies, white cloth, moon-stitched, stamped with the crest of the royal house, the silver wolf facing east. The image had always made me ache. A wolf who never looked back. A wolf who could smell a storm before it formed. A wolf who did not apologize for wanting or for leaving. I bought a heel of bread and pressed it to my lips like an apology I couldn't afford. The baker's apprentice flirted as easily as breathing. I smiled because smiling was currency and I needed all the small coin I could gather. I ate as I walked because hunger did not care for ceremony and neither did the child. After a few bites, I tucked the rest away and drifted toward the river. where the laundry women sang to keep time with their work and boys threw stones at reflection fish. Stopped at a stall selling paper and ink. The man who kept it looked like a folded letter thin, precise, corners sharp. He showed me a stack of cream sheets with deckled edges. For poems, he said, and then, when I didn't answer, for anything that must last. The phrase snagged at me. I bought 2 sheets and a narrow vial of ink. I had learning enough to write, not enough to call it beautiful. But beautiful is not what this truth required. It required standing upright on a page and refusing to be talked over. Back in the room, I cleared the table of dried sprigs and a jar of resin salve the apothecary's wife had asked me to label. I set the paper down and watched it for a long while as if it might blink. My hands remembered how to fix wounds and muddle tinctures and mend seams. They did not remember how to start sentences that could drag heavy hearts safely across. I opened the window again. The sky had blued toward afternoon. Laundry flapped on lines like quiet prayers. I dipped the pen. If I reached for anger, the words trembled and turned sharp. If I reached for pleading, they curled and begged and made me small. If I reached for honesty, they steadied. I wrote his name once and then stopped, because even inked it made my chest go tight. I wrote instead, I didn't mean to tell you like this. My hand hovered. Not enough. Not right. I lifted the pen and started again. You once said the moon keeps what we give it. I think she kept that night. I told the page what the linen had already told me. I told it in slow lines, in the voice I would want someone to use if they were telling me something I might not be brave enough to hear. I did not ask him to leave his future for me. I did not accuse him of leaving me behind. Those truths had already happened. I only wrote what was happening now, written in a language older than any vow. I am carrying your child. The nib scratched, a small, insistent sound. I told him I had come to the capital because a midwife near the river had a reputation for hands as steady as winter stars. I told him I did not expect kindness, only the dignity of knowledge. I told him he could send word to the apothecary's shop addressed to the girl whose tinctures never spill. The apothecary's wife would know it meant me. I had earned the nickname with care that felt like prayer. When the first page filled, I sat back and let my cramped fingers breathe. The room had warmed with afternoon. Dust motes turned lazy in the light. I read what I'd written and winced at an awkward phrase, the way it made me sound like a beggar of mercy I did not want. I smoothed it, paired it, left it simple. I signed only my given name. A queen signs with a house. A girl signs with her whole heart. I did not seal the letter. I did not address it. I did not know if I would send it, but writing it was like lifting a stone off my ribs. I set the page on the sill so the ink would dry clean and closed my eyes for the first. Time since morning. Sleep circled like a wary animal. I let it. I dreamed of the past again, of pines holding up a winter sky and of him standing half in shadow, snow striking sparks on his dark hair. In the dream, he said my name the way a man says home when he has been gone too long. In the dream, I said his name back like a vow I had not agreed to but could not take back. Dreams are dangerous like that. They make you brave where the waking world makes you careful. I woke to the sound of commotion and the street laughter too loud. Drums tested then stilled. I rose and leaned out to see a practice procession of pages, all elbows and pride, trying on the steps they would take on the wedding day. There were fresh banners now, and a seamstress balanced a box nearly as wide as she was on her hip, needle and pins bristling from the cushion at her wrist. A boy in a too large livery dropped a ribbon and chased it as the wind dragged it dancing along the cobbles. The city was rehearsing Happiness. My heart did not know the steps. I drew back and found the letter again. The light had gentled. The ink had dried to a clean, quiet black. I could fold this and tuck it under a stone and leave it for a future that might never come. I could burn it and tell myself silence is safety. I could walk to the palace gates and try to speak to a guard and be laughed into the dust for daring to think a king's name could be warmed by my mouth. He is to be married. I reminded myself, your news would not change what the kingdom needs, but need has more than one name. The kingdom's need was peace. The child's need was truth. Mine was smaller, and for that it felt somehow bigger. I wanted to stop belonging to fear. I took a breath that felt like the first one of my life and folded the letter along careful lines. The paper felt heavier once it knew what it carried. I slid it into a plain envelope, pressed the edges shut with resin the apothecary would not miss, and wrote nothing on the front. Not yet. Names have power, and I was not ready to hammer mine to the palace door. I needed to see him once more, not to beg or to pull or to unravel vows, only to confirm that the world had not invented him to torment me, that he existed in light as he had in snow, that I had not made a mistake of memory. I wrapped my cloak tighter and slipped the envelope into the inside pocket where the lining had torn. My fingers found the familiar rip and sighed into it. You hold what you can with what you have. A midwife once told me when I was a child turning a scrap of linen into a doll's dress. If it unravels, you stitch again. If it unravels again, you double thread. On the stairs, the apothecary's wife's voice rose. If you go out, bring back time. The soldiers have asked for it. They always do when there's a wedding love gives them colds. I smiled despite myself. I'll bring time, and yourself back in one piece. She added it as if it were the most ordinary request in the world. The air carried a crispness that promised the evening would bite. The palace rose at the end of the avenue like a storybook. The city kept forgetting to close. I walked with everyone else who had somewhere to be or who didn't and pretended they did. Because drifting looks too much like loneliness, and loneliness is expensive here. The closer I came to the royal quarter, the smoother the stones. The shops grew dignified and quiet, announcing their importance by refusing to beg for your coin. A line of young men in wolf-gray livery jogged past, breath fogging. They laughed in tight bursts and did not see me at all. At the gates, the world narrowed to iron and shadow. The crest above the arch shone like a reprimand. Guards stood at their posts, faces disciplined into silence. Spears butt-ended in rhythm as if hearts could be trained to beat on command. People lingered at a distance respectful enough to avoid reprimand and close enough to feel included in a story not theirs. I found a patch of wall that still remembered warmth from afternoon sun and claimed it. My breath made a small cloud. I counted the clouds to keep from counting seconds. I did not know what I expected, certainly not the clean split of a crowd, the hush that rolls like a soft wind when something important is about to happen. I did not expect the surge of livery and the lift of horses' heads and the chime of tack. And I did not expect, most of all, to see him like this, not in snow and not in the half-light of choices too soft to be confessed. But an open day, in his own name, the city's eyes on him. He was wearing steel and silk the way men wear certainty. The wolf sigil at his throat caught the last of the sun and made it a star. His hair was cropped tighter than I remembered, the line of his jaw an argument no one dared to win. 2 steps behind him, a woman with pale hair and a mouth made for doors walked as if the stones had been trained under her feet. Since birth his first love, I thought, though the words turned ash and would not swallow. He looked, for a moment only, very tired. A little boy darted from the crowd to wave a sprig of white blossom at him. The guards tensed. The alpha king crouched with a grace that didn't belong to ceremony and took the blossom and tucked it behind the boy's ear and said something that made the child's whole body laugh. The city sighed around us, then remembered it was supposed to cheer, and did so dutifully. He rose. His gaze swept lazily. A king's own in glance rooflines, banners, faces. And then mine, the world disobedient, stopped. I did not smile. I could not. Something moved in me that was not fear and not relief and not hunger, but some fierce, quiet recognition I had no word for. The line between us shrank to something thread thin and burning. For one breath, too, he looked confused, as if a song he had forgotten was playing near and he could not name its tune. Then the confusion turned to a likeness of pain that the woman beside him her. The first touched his sleeve. My lord. A question. A claim. He blinked, mastered his face, and the king returned. He gave the crowd what it wanted, a raised hand, a smile practiced enough it looked like truth. The column moved. He passed beneath the gate. He did not call my name. I had not expected him to. Even if he had, the stone between us would have swallowed it, but the letter in my pocket turned heavy, as if ink becomes iron when a man's eyes find you after telling himself he never would again. I stayed until the light thinned to blue, and the wind found the seams in my cloak. The city prepared for evening the way dancers prepare for a final turn quieting, measuring. I bought time from a woman who called me sweetheart in a tone that sounded like a test, and I passed. I climbed the stairs, knees stiff, lungs a little raw. The apothecary's wife took the bundle without thanks or scold, too busy dictating a list of what tomorrow would require. If we run out of honey, the soldier boys will pretend they can't swallow medicine. She muttered, then glanced up sharply and stopped. What did the night do to you? It's not the night, I said, and regretted it, and carried the admission past her before she could ask the questions that invited Dot in my room. The letter waited like a held breath. I lit the small lamp and watched the flame build its soft, stubborn kingdom. My hands were steady when I reached into my pocket. I laid the envelope on the table and considered its blank front. I thought of the woman with pale hair and a mouth like doors. I thought of a boy with a blossom behind his ear and the way a king had crouched in armor. I thought of snow I could still taste and a past I could still trace with my fingertips. I thought of the quiet thrum under my palm when I pressed it to myself, and the way the thrum said, "We are here. We are here, we are here." I dipped the pen again. I wrote his name. Ink dries fast when there's no wind. I sealed the letter with resin I warmed between my fingers until it yielded. I pressed my thumbprint into it without meaning to and left it there on purpose. A queen leaves a crest. A girl leaves a truth. I was here. The apothecary's wife had a boy who ran errands for fair pay and extra bread. I found him washing jars with a bored ferocity that left the rims too clean to be real. Do you want to earn enough for honey? I asked. In the weeks since I learned about the life growing inside me, I had kept my world small. One rented room. One walk to the well. One promise whispered to the child I wasn't ready to name. You will be safe, but news doesn't ask permission to enter small worlds. It rides in on gossip, on laughter that doesn't belong to you, on strangers saying names you once whispered like prayers. That morning, every sound in the village square seemed sharpened, the hammering of hooves, the crackle of firewood, the chatter of women trading cloth and secrets. And behind it all, the same song repeating, the Alpha King is getting married. I carried the bread home and tried to eat, but the taste of ash lingered. Each rumor was a cut, small but deep. They said he would marry for peace, for the unity of the border pacts. They said she was beautiful, pure-blooded, noble. They said she had waited for him since childhood. No one said anything about the girl he left behind in the snow. No one said anything about the child she carried. At night, I lay awake, one hand resting on the quiet swell of my stomach. The baby was still too small to move, but I felt it, a flutter, a whisper under the skin, as if the soul inside already understood its mother's sorrow. He will never know, I told the darkness. He doesn't need to. That lies sound hollow when spoken to something that is half-truth itself. days blurred. The village dressed itself for celebration that didn't belong to. Banners, stitched with the royal crest, fluttered from every window, silver wolves facing east. Even the children played the wedding, pretending to march down dirt roads with crowns made of hay. I watched from my doorway, arms crossed over my chest. The laughter stung more than any insult. A young mother passed, her toddler riding on her hip. The child's laughter bubbled in the air, innocent and complete. For a moment, I saw my future in her, a woman alone, carrying love that had no place to go. And then the question struck like lightning. What will I tell our child when they ask about their father? That he was a king? That he once loved me but loved duty more? That he never knew they existed? Each answer felt cruel. Each silence felt worse. By the third week, the wedding rumors had grown louder, more detailed. The invitations had gone out. The palace gates were hung with moon-white silk. The Alpha King's voice was said to have been heard practicing vows at dawn. He sounds happy, someone told me in the market. He deserves it. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Of course, I said. He always does. I lied because I had to, because truth would unravel me in public. That night, I walked beyond the village, to the river where the moon laid a silver path over the water. I sat on the cold stones and listened to the current move, slow, endless, indifferent. He will marry, I whispered to the wind, and I will disappear. But the wind, stubborn thing that it is, carried my voice back to me. Not yet. It seemed to say. I pressed both hands over my stomach. You're not supposed to hear these things, I said softly. But maybe you already know. The water shimmered, and for an instant I imagined another world, one where he had chosen love instead of power, where our child would have been born beneath the palace moon instead of a rented roof. The days grew colder, the nights longer. I worked at the apothecary to afford my stay, grinding herbs until my wrists ached. The old woman I worked for noticed my exhaustion. You need rest, she said. You look as if you're fighting ghosts. I smiled faintly. Aren't we all? But inside I knew my ghosts had names. One of them wore a crown. Then one morning, the courier arrived in the village square. His voice was bright, his parchment gold. He read the proclamation for all to hear. By order of the crown, the Alpha King will be wed to Lady Elise of House Raverin on the first full moon of the new season. Applause followed. Bells rang. Children cheered. I felt the world tilt. The parchment fluttered in the wind and landed near my feet. I picked it up. The ink shimmered black and perfect, spelling out the name of the man who once swore he would never belong to anyone else. I folded the notice and kept it, not as proof of loss, but as fuel for what I needed to do next. Because that night I dreamed again. He stood in the snow, the same dream as before. Only this time he turned when I called his name. His eyes weren't cold. They were frightened. And when I reached for him, he whispered, "You should have told me." I woke with tears on my face and a resolve I hadn't felt in months. Maybe the world didn't want my story, but destiny did. Maybe the moon that watched over his vows would remember the secret it already kept inside me. I began to pack before the sun rose. Only a few clothes, the letter I'd written, and the courage that comes when a mother has no choice left but to speak. As I closed the door behind me, I looked back at the tiny room that had sheltered me and whispered, "He will know." The path to the capital was long, but silence was longer. And I had carried mine for too long. Chapter 3. The letter never sent. The road to the capital unspooled like a ribbon. Someone had dropped from the mountains, frayed at the edges. Beautiful from a distance, cruel to the feet. I walked it with my cloak tied tight and my hand steady over the child I carried, as if an open palm could be a shield against the world. The morning mist clung to the hedges, Crows argued about nothing in the bare trees. Wagons complained in old wooden voices. It was a day that looked exactly like every other day and yet felt like a threshold. Had left the village before the baker's wife could open her mouth and turn my resolve into a cautionary tale. The apothecary's wife pressed time into my palm and pretended it was for headaches. We saw through each other and said nothing. There are goodbyes that are doorways and goodbyes that are stitches. This was both dot by noon. The fields gave way to marshland and the sky lifted. The path split around a frozen pond, one track hugging the water's edge, the other shouldering through reeds and dry cattails. I followed the reed path because reeds bend and survive, and I was done with pretending to be a tree. A peddler passed me with a cart full of cracked enamel bowls and saints' medals that had lost their chains. He tried to sell me luck. I told him I had already spent my last coin on courage. He laughed and said, "Courage is a poor man's luck." "Then let me be poor," I answered, and kept walking. I did not tell him that my luck was sleeping under my ribs and would wake hungry no matter what. I chose Dot near the bend where the marsh gives way to the first watchtower. A coach rattled past, drawn by horses whose tails had been braided with silver thread. The coachman cracked his whip and never looked at me. A girl in a veil peered through the glass for the length of a heartbeat, then vanished into her own reflection. I wondered if she was headed toward the palace to be clothed in the same bright lie that had once warmed me. That love is strong enough to argue with power and win. The watchtower guard leaned on his spear as if it were an opinion. "Name?" he asked, bored because a woman walking alone is rarely trouble worth remembering. "Lark," I said, the name my mother gave me when the midwife set me on her chest and said, "This one will sing herself out of cages." I had not yet decided whether to tell the city the rest of me. Best to start with a part that did not make men put hands on hilts. "And your business in the capital, Lark?" "Medicine," I said, which was not a lie. "And a letter?" He eyed my cloak, my boots, my hands, the quiet checklist of men trained to measure risk. "Who teaches you medicine?" "Everyone who has ever bled in front of me," I said softly, and he surprised himself by smiling. He lifted the branch that barred the road and let me pass with a nod that meant be careful. Though a man like him would never admit to saying so. The city rose by degrees, as if embarrassed to be seen dressing. First a scatter of farmsteads, then small houses pressed shoulder to shoulder like secrets, then the wall with its narrow-eyed guards, then the gates wide enough to swallow a storm. I stopped within the shadow of the arch and put my hand flat against the stone. It was cold and very old and full of other people's names. Mine sounded small here, but the child's name, still unknown, drummed against my palm with patient insistence. The way a river taps at ice until one day it remembers how to be itself again. Inside the walls, the world rearranged itself into rows and rules. The river quarter smelled of salt and iron and the sweet patience of rot. The market quarter smelled like a story about bread that almost ends happily. The temple quarter smelled like incense and rain on stone. Above it all, the palace gathered light and turned it into reason. I found a room above, a lantern maker's shop 3 streets from the river. The stairs groaned under my weight, as if protesting the arrival of another tenant who would not pay on time. The window was small, the bed narrow, the walls stubborn. It would do. I set my bundle on the floor and the letter on the table and stood looking at both for a long breath. The letter wasn't much cream paper, a hand that tried to be careful and was betrayed by truth. It was the version I had copied from the first, the one that had lived on my sill like a dare. I had folded it cleanly and sealed it with wax the color of old cherries. I had not written his title on the front, only his name, the one that had once been for me alone and would soon belong to 1,000 cheering mouths. I ran a fingertip over the wax as if that could teach me how to be brave in public. I didn't. yet know how to deliver a king's name into a palace and ask it to find its owner. I only knew that I would not hunger met me like an old friend I had tried not to answer. I bought a bowl of stew from a woman with arms like tree trunks and a laugh that made the air warmer. I ate standing, watching the street show off for no one. Boys throwing dice too close to the watchman's eye. A seamstress carrying a dress on her forearms like a baby. A priest losing an argument with a goat. Life does not stop for the sacred. That is the sacred. When the bowl was empty and my spine had learned the room's shape, I took the letter again and went to find the river. The river in the capital is narrow where it enters and wide where it leaves, as if the city swallows it and then kindly remembers to spit it back out. Boats nodded along the piers, ropes groaned. Gulls complained. Across the water, I could see the thin spire of the old chapel where, once, I had stood with a different letter in my mouth and 1,000 words I did not say because his hands were already shaking. I turned away from the memory before it became a house I could not leave. There were couriers near the eastern gate, of course boys with bright brass badges and mouths too clever by half. Men with clean hands who liked gatehouses and rules. Girls with callous feet and eyes like flint. I watched them for an hour, counting who came and who went, and which door each used. I learned which man pocketed letters meant to be delivered, and which girl stopped to read when she thought no one would notice. I learned who the palace guards waved through and who they scolded for breathing too near the threshold. Then I walked up to the one who hadn't stopped moving for 60 minutes straight. She had a braid down her back thick enough to be a rope and a way of saying, "What?" with her eyebrows only. "I need a letter to reach a man who has forgotten how to be found," I told her. "Then you're looking for a priest, not a courier," she said, but the edge of her mouth curved, and I knew she'd already decided to be on my side. "It must reach the king's hand," I said. "Not his steward, not his counselors, not the man who sharpens his knives and dulls his conscience. His hand." At the word king, men look over their shoulders as if the sound itself might pull them into trouble. She didn't glance anywhere. She only held out her palm. "Half now, half when the seal is broken in front of you." "I can pay all now," I said. "Then you don't know the city yet. Half now." I gave her the coins, the apothecary's generosity, the village's pity, my own careful hoard, then put the letter in her hand. Her fingers were ink-stained. She tucked it into an inner pocket without reading the name. "Wait by the old chapel," she said. "If the king is a man today, you'll have your sight of him. If he's a crown, you'll have your answer. What if he's both? Then we'll find out whether the hand is attached to the heart," she said, and pushed into the movement of the street as if it were water and she had been born with gills. I waited by the chapel the way women have always waited, pretending to pray and actually counting. The candles were fewer than the last time. The cold did not care for piety. I sat in the rear pew where the wood had been polished by 100. Griefs and laid my palm flat over the smallness of my belly. The child answered with stillness. I took it for consent. When she returned, the courier's braid had loosened and her cheeks were bright with the kind of wind men call bracing and women call foolish. She nodded once. "Come, now?" "You said his hand," she answered. "You didn't say when." We moved like shadows do when they have decided to be brave close to walls. Past the market where vendors shouted truths and lies with equal conviction. Across the square where boys pretended to be soldiers and girls pretended to be queens, and everyone practiced forgetting they would grow up to be something else entirely. At the palace service gate, she did not knock in fear. She knocked in rhythm. The small door opened to a sliver of a man with a large opinion of himself. He started to say no before he knew what the question was. The courier lifted a small brass token. He stopped. "Tokens are the only magic courtiers respect." 2 minutes, he muttered. And if anyone asks, no one will ask, she said. And we were inside a corridor that smelled of wax in winter and the careful rot of old power. Servants hurried without appearing to. Somewhere a clock fussed, somewhere a child laughed and was shushed. My pulse counted faster than the clock did, and I pressed my hand to the place that could tell the difference between fear and a new life. We climbed one flight, then another, then stopped in a small antechamber where the courier straightened her braid and her breath. In there, she said, tipping her chin at a carved door. If you hear boots, be air. What are you? Anne? Accident the palace keeps making, she said, and grinned like a wolf under a schoolgirl's hood. Left alone, I understood how small I was, not only in the ways that matter to kings, but in the ways that matter to women whose hands have known work and want. The room was the size of a house. The carpet was thicker than the bread I'd eaten for a week. The silence was clean and deliberate. I stood at the edge of a rug and did not step on it. My boots were honest. I did not want to teach the rug my name. The door opened up, not to him. Not yet. To a man who had worn obedience for so long, it had become a kind of skin. He looked at me the way a catalog looks at a single, unpriced item. Name, he said. Lark. House. None. He disliked that. Trade? Medicine, I said. And truth. He disliked that more. You can leave both with me? No, I said, and though I kept my voice gentle, I shaped the word as if it were a blade. Silence grew teeth. He considered calling guards not because he needed them, but because he wanted me to know he could. Then something changed in his face, the peel of patience, the ghost of curiosity. You carry a letter, he said, and... A life, I answered, and watched his pupils narrow with the arithmetic of the court. Before he could speak again, a voice beyond the door said, low and even, let her in. The steward stepped aside as if his bones had been taught to obey. He did not look at me. I slipped past him into a room that made the chapel's candles seem impertinent. There were maps on the walls and a desk that had learned 1,000 laws and unlearned as many kindnesses. And by the window, bareheaded, without the armor of a crown, stood the man who had once warmed snow with his body so that I would not freeze. He did not move at first. Neither did I. There is a way a king stands when he is being watched, and a way a man stands when he is alone, and his body traitor to his title had chosen the second. His shoulders were tired. His mouth was the kind that finds a reason to be stern and then remembers laughter late. He looked like the night in the past and also like someone who had not slept since. The courier's warning returned. If he is a man today, Your Majesty, I said, and hated how the words scraped me on the way out. Once I had called him by a name that didn't make my teeth ache afterward. He turned. The line of his jaw is what you notice first if you don't know him. If you do, it is his eyes. They found mine the way thirst finds water. Close the door, he told the steward without looking away from me. The door closed, and the steward became part of the furniture of someone else's mistake. I reached into my cloak and brought out the letter. It looked small in that room paper as shy in palaces. He held out his hand, palm up, as if I were offering a bird and not a blade. I did not give it to him yet. You asked for my hand, he said quietly. Here it is. I asked for your hand because your crown has too many mouths, I answered. I need you to read without their teeth in the words. Something almost like humor tugged at him. They bite everything, he admitted, and the man I remembered stepped once out from behind the king he had become. I placed the letter in his palm. He did not tear the seal as a soldier would. He warmed it with his breath the way a man opens a promise he is afraid to break. The wax gave with a sigh. He read, and the room learned what real silence is. When he finished, he held very still. My name on his lips would have sounded like a kind of prayer. He did not say it. He set the letter on the desk as if it were an instrument that had just taught him how to hear. How long have you known? He asked. Since the day the moon. Forgot to be cold, I said, and his mouth tightened because he remembered that night and weather more than words. Why didn't you send this sooner? Because I was afraid. Because I thought I could carry a secret farther than I could. Because I wanted to give you one last chance to choose what was right without me tipping the scales with blood. Because I didn't want to be the ruin your enemies were craving. I could have said all of that. I said none of it. Because a letter feels like a hammer, I answered, and I was not ready to break either of us. He flinched as if the word break had muscle. He picked up the page again, read the line where I said I am carrying your child, as if it could be different the second time, as if the words might soften and let him breathe. They didn't. Truth has a spine. He set the paper down and looked at me like a man looking at the edge of a map and realizing the sea is wider than the drawing suggests. Are you well? He asked. We are, I said, and the plural studied me as if the floor had decided to be kind. I came to the city for a midwife who knows how to listen. He nodded. An intimacy. Good, he said, and then again, softer. Good. Footsteps moved beyond the door. The steward's shadow stretched beneath it, thin and accusing. The Alpha King turned his head slightly, the hunter in him measuring distance and noise, then looked back at me. They will want to turn this into a war, he said. Every truth is a weapon in the wrong hand. Then put it in the right one, I said, surprised by how steady I sounded. And if the right hand is mine, he said, what will you let it carry? It would have been easier to speak anger, to list what he hadn't done and rehearse what I had suffered. Anger is a language with a fast grammar. But the child shifted under my palm, as much movement as a thought, and reminded me that the only prize worth winning was not a victory but a future. I will let it carry us, I said. If it learns how to be gentle. He closed his eyes once like a man stepping into water. When he opened them, the king had not left him, but the man had climbed onto the same shore. I am to wed at moonrise 3 days from now, he said. The council has sharpened itself for this. The border packs wait with their mouths open, ready to swallow the words peace and profit and forget they ever tasted blood. And you? I asked, what do you wait to swallow? He looked at my hands, then at the letter, then at the space between us, the corridor down which everything would run, ruin or salvation. My pride, he said at last, and the lie I have been feeding it. He moved around the desk closer and stopped where the shadow of the window frame drew a dark line across the carpet. He would not cross it without being invited. Small mercies matter. He raised a hand and did not reach for me, only held it up as if testing the shape of absence. I have wanted to be the man who chooses the right thing without being told by fate what it is, he said. But fate has better handwriting than I do. He glanced toward the door, toward the council and its appetite, then back at me. Give me tonight. For what? I asked. To throw away everything that isn't you, he said simply. The words knocked the air out of me. Not because I had not imagined them, but because imagination had never managed to make them feel this plain. Plainness is a mercy. It doesn't hide teeth. The footsteps outside returned, heavier. The steward's cough scratched the wood. The courier would be down in the service corridor, pretending to be a bucket. I breathed in. Tonight, I said. Where? The old chapel, I answered, because stones keep secrets better than men. At moonrise. He nodded once, as if sealing a treaty with something older than law. Come alone. I am never alone, I said, and let my palm speak the rest. Something like reverence crossed his face, quick as the wing of a small bird. Then come as you are, he said. I will meet you as I should have always done. I turned toward the door because I could feel the room gathering itself to remember it was a palace. If they stop me, they won't. he said. And when a king says won't that way, the world tries for a while to obey. He took up the letter again and slid it into a drawer. I will keep this where my hands can find it. I paused with my fingers on the latch. Don't keep it there too long. The edge of his mouth moved. No, he said. No, I won't. The corridor had grown narrower in my absence. The steward offered me a look that said this was not how things were done, and another look that said this was exactly how things were always done, only with other names. The courier fell into step beside me as if we had agreed to it yesterday. Well, she asked. He has a hand, I said. And a heart? We'll find out at the chapel. She snorted softly as we slipped back into the breath of the palace and then the lungs of the city. Men, she said, as if the word itself were a continent with its own weather. Do you need anything that's not a miracle? Bread, I said. And a quiet corner. I can sell you the first and rent you the second. She looked at me sidelong. If it goes wrong, run for the north gate. The guards there are lazy and sentimental. And if it goes right, then you won't need gates, she said, and vanished into the crowd like a thought you mean to write down and forget until it saves you. Later, back in the lantern maker's room, the afternoon was behaving as if it were any other. The light came on stubbornly slow, the way soup decides to boil only after you've stopped watching. I sat on the narrow bed and pressed my thumb into the wax of the second envelope I had not sealed. It was not for him. It was for me, the words I hadn't said because I had been too busy surviving. I wrote them now, not as a letter, but as a promise scratched into the underside of a table where no one will think to look. I am allowed to want a life that does not apologize for existing. I tucked the scrap beneath the mattress, because hiding a vow is sometimes the only way to keep it safe from yourself. Evening came with its small mercies. The lantern maker's wife testing the wicks by tapping them gently with a fingernail. The smell of fried onions arguing with the river for the right to be called home. A child's half-invented lullaby tumbling down the stairs. I washed my face in water that had learned to be patient. I plaited my hair back and tied it with the blue ribbon. I wore the plain dress again because truth does not need embroidery. I wrapped myself in my cloak. I stood at the door and waited for fear to make its usual speech. It cleared its throat twice and then sat down. Perhaps it was tired. The city at moonrise put on its softer throat. The banners failed to glitter. The stones remembered how to be quiet. I walked the way I had walked before. Only this time I knew where each loose cobble lived and where the shadows were kind. At the chapel door, I paused, palm on the wood, listening. Somewhere inside, a candle decided to burn. He was already there. He stood near the front, as if he had considered the altar and decided it wasn't high enough to hold what needed saying. No crown, no cloak. The room took him in with the same casual astonishment with which it accepted dust motes and miracles. He turned when I entered, and the look that crossed his face made the long road worthwhile. Even if I had later learned I had come for nothing but this single, unarmored look. You came, he said. You asked. I answered. Silence unspooled between us, long enough for the moon to climb a rung on its invisible ladder. He gestured to a pew, and we sat like parishioners who had forgotten the words and were waiting for the priest to remember them for us. I told the council I would take care. He said, Did they try to follow? They always do, he said, then shook his head, almost amused. But even a council knows when it is the tide's job to move the boat. He folded his hands and then unfolded them. Lark, he said, and the sound of my name in that room steadied something I had not realized was shaking. I have done a thing a king does not do. You've done several, I said, because humor had kept me alive in rooms that wanted me small. You've breathed. You've come without anyone writing it down. You've sat on a pew. I have loved you, he said simply, and the moon forgot its lines for a beat. I held very still, the way a deer does when the world finally speaks its true weather. He continued in the same quiet voice, careful and honest as a man bandaging himself. And I tried to make that love wait while I did what they call duty and I call fear. I thought I could put it in a room and close the door and no one would hear it. It did not stay quiet. And now you have brought me proof that it will not be silenced. I am not sorry, he breathed, but I am sorry for the ways you were made to carry that alone. The child shifted a small tide. I pressed my palm and felt the river answer. I did carry it alone, I said. Until today. Not anymore, he said. We let the word settle, looking up at the patched glass where the moon made saints of broken bottles. A gull cried on the river, indignant and alive. Somewhere a drunk sang an old war song very badly. The world did not applaud us. It only continued, which is the most beautiful form of blessing. What now? I asked. He smiled like a man who has found a path through fog by deciding to walk it. I will not marry her. Your counsel will set itself on fire. Then let them discover what water is for. He tipped his head. Peace built on a lie is just war with better tailoring. And the border pacts? I will give them trade without a wedding, he said. I will give them treaties that do not require women to be bridges for men too afraid to build their own. And if they want blood, they will have to want it out loud. I wanted to believe him so quickly that I refused to, for a breath, to make sure the wanting wasn't my hunger dressing up as wisdom. And me? I asked. What do you give me? He faced me fully. My name, he said, if you will have it. My hands, whether the day is sweet or sours. A home that doesn't apologize for its rooms. He swallowed, the first tremor. And a father for our child who does not hide. The simplicity undid me. I realized I had been planning to argue, to plant flags around what forgiveness should cost. But forgiveness, when it is real, is not a price. It is a door. You walk through it together or not at all. Then we will have to be brave, I said. We will have to be true, he answered. Brave follows truth like a dog that refuses to be left behind. He reached then and stopped a breath away, asking. I nodded. His fingers were warm where they covered my hand. We sat like that for a long time, the chapel counting, the moon a careful witness. At last he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to mine. I will speak to them in the morning, he said, all of them. I will tell them my wedding is not a bridge but a home, and that I have already found my door. And if they try to shut it, I asked. Then I will learn how to break a door politely, he said, and I laughed, and the sound lit the room more surely than the candles did. When we stood, the floor remembered how to hold our weight. At the door, he paused. I will walk you as far as I can without making the city think it should sing. It will sing soon enough, I said. Let it learn the tune. He answered. We stepped into the cold. Night smelled like iron and bread and chance. He kept his distance but matched my pace, a courtesy and a vow. At the corner near the lantern maker's shop, he stopped. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, I repeated, and the word did not sound like a cliff anymore. It sounded like a key. I climbed the stairs alone but not lonely. In the room, I unwrapped myself from cloak and ribbon and fear and lay on the narrow bed with my hand where it had been all day, every day. The child turned, a whisper of movement as if adjusting a blanket. Tomorrow, I told them. Outside, the city muttered and settled. Far off, the palace bells counted a late hour. Somewhere, a counselor woke with a pain in his chest and did not yet know it was the future asking to be let in. Somewhere, a woman with pale hair through a glass, and then remembered she had been taught not to miss. The letter I had never meant to send sat safe in a drawer that would not hold it long. In the quiet that followed, I slept like someone who had made a choice and would keep making it until it became a life. Chapter 4. The journey to the capital, the morning I left the village. The sky looked like unpolished silver muted, expectant, as though even the clouds were holding their breath. I had not planned to go, but after the letter escaped me, there was no longer such a thing as plan-only consequence. Somewhere beyond the horizon, that piece of paper was fluttering through the world, carrying my heart in sentences I would never have dared to speak. If it truly reached him, if he read it before his wedding, I couldn't let the story end there, written by accident, finished by strangers. So I packed a single bag, 2 dresses, a small pouch of coins, a flask of water, and the courage that comes only when a woman has already lost 2. Much to fear anything else, the road from the village wound between sleeping fields and forests that smelled of wet pine and old promises. Every step felt like stepping away from the version of myself that had survived in silence. I tried not to think of him, but the world kept reminding me. Every soldier's uniform carried his crest. Every passing traveler spoke of the royal wedding of the century. They said the Alpha King had never looked happier. They said his bride was a symbol of peace, his choice a sign of strength. I wondered if they knew how love sometimes masquerades as duty, and how duty, when fed long enough, begins to taste like regret. At dusk, I stopped at a roadside inn. The keeper was kind, the kind of woman whose smile had survived grief. "You heading to the city for the wedding?" she asked as she poured stew into a chipped bowl. I nodded, though the words almost caught in my throat. "I suppose I am." She laughed softly. "Suppose?" Most girls would kill to see the ceremony. The Alpha King's marrying the noble's daughter Elise, they say. Beauty like moonlight, heart like stone. You've heard? I've heard. The stew tasted of herbs and ashes. When she left, I pressed both hands to my stomach. "He's not the villain they'll paint him to be," I whispered to the small life inside me, "but he is lost." The candle by my bed flickered as though agreeing. I slept restlessly, dreaming of snow letters, and the sound of footsteps that always stopped just short of finding me. By the second day, the road grew crowded. Carts laden with flowers, tailors carrying bolts of silk, vendors shouting about. Sweets for the festival everywhere. The city's heartbeat quickened toward celebration. And there I was, a shadow moving through their light, carrying a secret the size of destiny. At a bridge that arched over a slow-moving river, I saw a courier arguing with a guard. The leather satchel on his shoulder looked painfully familiar, stitched. At the corner with blue thread, sealed with the royal wax mark. My letter. I felt my pulse leap to my throat. The courier waved his papers in protest. "Delivery for the palace urgent." "Straight to the king's chambers." The guard, bored and half asleep, waved him through. The courier mounted his horse and vanished on the hill toward the capital gates. It should have been relief. Instead, it felt like the earth shifting underfoot, like fate itself had decided that my silence was over. By nightfall, the city's lights appeared in the distance, scattered like stars fallen to the ground. I stood on a ridge, the wind biting through my cloak, and for a long while I simply watched. That was his world, bright, vast, untouchable. Mine was somewhere between the shadows and the stars, but tonight those worlds would touch again. The capital gates loomed tall, carved with wolves and moons. Guards watched from their posts, spears glinting. I waited in line with merchants, pilgrims, and dreamers, each of us carrying our own small reason for being here. When it was my turn, the guard looked me over. "Name?" "Lark," I said. "Purpose?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "To deliver something that's already arrived." He frowned, confused, but let me through. Inside the walls, the air changed. The streets were clean and paved with white stone, the smell of perfume drifting through open windows. Everywhere, people were laughing. The wedding banners hung from balconies, silver wolves facing east, entwined with roses. It was a city preparing for love, unaware it was also preparing for truth. I walked until my legs trembled. When I finally stopped, I found myself outside a small chapel near the river old, forgotten, quiet. The same one where we once hid from. A storm years ago, before he was king, before he belonged to someone else. I went inside. The candles burned low. Dust floated like sleeping ghosts in the golden light. I knelt before the altar, not to pray, but to steady myself. If he's meant to know, I whispered, then let him read it with mercy in his heart. The echo that answered was only wind, but it was enough. Somewhere in the palace beyond those walls, a servant would be knocking on a door, bowing low, saying, "A letter arrived, Your Majesty." The seal unmarked, but addressed by name. And somewhere the man I once loved would unfold that paper, read the truth, and feel the world tilt exactly as mine had the night I learned I was no longer alone. When I stepped outside again, the moon had risen bright, full, watching. I rested my hand on my belly. Whatever happens next, I whispered. We walked toward it. The city bells began to toll, counting down the final days to his wedding. But for me, it was the beginning of something far greater, a reunion written not by hands, but by fate itself. Chapter 5. The day our paths crossed again morning came dressed like a bride white light on river water, a hush over the streets. The city holding its breath as if afraid to wrinkle the day before the ceremony. I hadn't slept. I never do when the moon spends all night pressing its face against my window, asking questions. I walked anyway. The capital looks different when you've decided not to be invisible. Banners that once felt like warnings became signposts. The palace, which had towered like a story I wasn't in, became simply a destination. I tightened my cloak and followed the current of people merchants with honeyed nuts, girls with ribbon baskets, old men trying to look stern and failing in the face of sugar and song. At the end of the long avenue, the palace gates opened like a mouth that could bless or devour. Guards in wolf gray stood to either side, spears steady, eyes trained to slip past faces. I joined the cluster of onlookers at the marble steps and let the stone cool seep through my solace. Somewhere inside, my letter might already be a cut on his breath, or perhaps it still swam in corridors, snagged on the bureaucracy that makes palaces feel safe to men and dangerous to women. Either way, fate had left me with only one task: be here. The bells sounded the hour. The crowd pulled tight. A stitch cinched Dot, and then he appeared. Dot armor would have lied about him. He wore a dark coat instead. The kind that understands a back was not made to break under symbols. His hair was cropped, close, as if ceremony had an opinion about what a king's grief should look like. But grief had not been invited today. The city had called for radiance, and so radiance came: clean lines, steady mouth, wolf at his throat. There's a way the air changes when someone you love steps into it. The small noises go quiet. Your body remembers its true height. I went still without meaning to, like a compass needle finally finding north. He took the first step down Dot and stopped. His gaze skimmed the crowd in a king's pattern wide, disinterested, claiming without seeing. Then the pattern broke. His eyes caught on mine as if tripping on a thread I had stretched across the morning. Dot, everything inside me rose and did not shake. Dot, I did not smile. The woman on his arm, her veils poured like water over stone, looked toward the same place his eyes had fixed, and then past it. Not seeing me, not believing the world would dare show her anything she had not already counted. She leaned in. He did not lean back. The distance between them was the width of a silken sleeve, and 7 years of stories told to make pain sound like destiny. We stared the way the very young stare, forgetting the audience, forgetting the roles. His mouth parted a fraction. If he had said my name, the marble would have remembered it. I pressed my palm to my stomach without thinking, because the child had begun to prick like a hand knocking from the inside of a door, present, listening. He took another step. And in the tiny change of weight, I saw the night in the pass, snow hushing the world. His hand at my back saying this way to a future we were too frightened to choose. I saw the morning he left, his jaw set against softness. I saw the letter, a small bright bird I had not meant to release, vanishing over rooftops. I saw the river chapel where stones kept better secrets than men. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man lost and found all at once. Your Majesty, said the veiled woman Elise, the name the city had pledged itself to her voice, a question carefully sharpened to sound like concern. He blinked. The king returned, but not entirely. The man stayed near enough to make his bones ache. The steward at his shoulder cleared his throat in a language only power pretends not to understand. The crowd exhaled, then inhaled as the Alpha King, my Alpha, once lifted a hand to acknowledge them. His palm was steady. Mine were not, but I kept them still, because trembling is misread in public. He descended the remaining steps with the measured grace of someone who has trained his body to do what his heart refuses. At the base of the stairs, a boy darted forward with a garland. A guard reached to pull him back. The king lifted 2 fingers, and the world obeyed. The boy stopped inches from steel, wide-eyed, and held up his offering. Thank you, the Alpha said, taking the flowers. His gaze leading the boy's face only long enough to find mine again, as if to anchor himself to true weather. He tucked the garland into the crook of his arm, not on his bride, not on his own neck, then looked toward the avenue. The procession began. Hooves, drums, the ritual clatter of a city trying not to cry. I should have turned away. This was a play I had no role in. But the child nipped at me once, impatient, and I understood. We were not here to hide. We were here to witness. The moment fractured. A courier wind flushed. Braid askew broke through a side arch, braving the spear of a gate guard with a grin that said, "We have an appointment with chaos." She pressed a sealed envelope to the steward's chest, ignoring his hiss of protest. He glanced at the device melted in the wax, and went the particular color men turn when duty and fear make a fist of their hearts. Now, the steward rasped. Now, she said, and I recognized the way her eyes flicked from him to me and back again. She had seen me at the chapel. Her mouth made a quick, private smile. The kind women give one another when they are midwives to a truth. The steward approached the Alpha as if carrying a snake. The veiled woman tightened her hand on his arm. I did not breathe. Your Majesty, the steward murmured. The Alpha did not take his eyes off the crowd. Not now. It bears your private mark, the steward said. And the hand that brought it bites. A muscle jumped in the Alpha's cheek. Elise shifted, displeasure barely dressed. The drums did what drums do when they sense a change in a heartbeat. They hesitated, then pretended to have meant it. He took the letter not like a king. Like a man. My skin went cold, then warm. The wax was the color of cherries. My thumbprint had pressed itself to its face when I sealed it. Accident, ownership, prayer. He saw it. I felt the knowledge strike him from across the plaza. He slipped the envelope into his inner pocket and did not break the seal. Not yet. Not here. He lifted his chin and signaled the procession forward. The machine of ceremony shuddered, then caught. The drums remembered their job. The crowd remembered how to cheer. He began to walk. I moved with the flow of bodies, river to his sea, never closer than the promise of a shadow, never farther than the distance a breath learns in winter. The procession would cross the square and cut east toward the temple quarter where nobles liked to let their holiness be seen. If I was clever, I could arrive at the far gate before they did and stand again where his eyes would try not to find me. Was clever. I slipped through a seam in the people, turned down a lane of curtain makers, ducked under linen that smelled like sun and dye. A girl of about 12 almost collided with me and squeaked out a sorry, so true I could not help but touch her shoulder and blessed the apology with a smile dot at the far gate. The air thinned. Drums rolled. Hooves lilted. I stepped into the wedge of light between a statue and a pillar and waited. The crowd gathered around me like cloth pinched in a seamstress's fingers, and then he was there again, closer now. The lines of fatigue around his mouth like faint script a copyist had tried to erase. His gaze roved to the left, to the right, not seeing, and then snapped to the place where he stood as if a cord had been yanked hard from inside his chest. The veil on the woman's hair stirred in a breeze that had not visited me. She followed his line of sight, saw nothing, returned her attention to the applause. Even a good hunter can't see what he doesn't believe is possible. He put his hand to his heart, just a brush. Just a man remembering that there is a door there and wondering if it is open. The courier, my courier, whether the city knew it or not, slipped along the procession's edge like a cat with important business. Our eyes met. She nodded once, a conspirator's liturgy. He has a dot, he would read it soon. Perhaps in a corridor that kept secrets worse than it kept warmth. Perhaps with his fingers pressed hard to the words to force them to steady. Perhaps alone. Perhaps watched by men who mistook duty for godhood. He would read it. He would know. The ceremony machine tried to swallow him again, the steward murmuring. The master of drums signaling a flourish. A priest of the moon lifting a hand to confer borrowed divinity. He bowed to each, his body fluent in chess he had never wanted to play. And yet, twice in 10 steps, he looked back to where I stood and anchored himself on the thing in this morning that was not remote, not practiced. Not for show me, we reached the temple. Quarter. The procession would turn into the gallery where vows are rehearsed before they are spoken, where men tell stone what they plan to tell the sky. I could not follow there. Even a city trying to be merciful has doors it keeps for particular sins. I paused at the threshold with the rest of the uninvited and watched as he climbed the shallow stairs and vanished into the temple's shadow. The crowd loosened, then frayed, then spilled back into the marketplace to buy sweets that would taste like victory to those hungry for spectacle. I stayed where I was, hand on the low wall, until Marble remembered it was cold and I remembered I was not. The child rolled once, as if turning to listen to the part of the day I could not see. A boy with smudged cheeks came pelting down the side steps, nearly losing a shoe. He's called for air, he announced to no one and to me. Said he needs the river. The river. The chapel. I went, not running, not hurrying. Just walking the way a woman walks when she has decided to move toward her life rather than away from fear. The chapel door was ajar. Candles, dust, slow chant of water beyond the walls. He stood, not at the altar this time, but halfway down the aisle, as if he had started toward the front and remembered that this wasn't about asking for miracles. It was about making one. He held the letter open now, folded back along creases that said, I read you twice. He looked up for a long, merciful moment. We were only 2 people in a room remembering how to be themselves. Then he came toward me. Not like a king going to claim, like a man going to confess. He stopped a breath away, close enough that the smell of him cedar, steel. The ache of a sleepless night found the part of me that had been fasting from it and fed me. I saw you, he said first, as if that were news. At the gate. I thought I had dreamed you into morning again. And then he held up the letter, palm shaking once, tenderly. And then you wrote my name like a truth I could not lie around. He swallowed. His voice roughened. Are you well? We are, I said. The 2 words were a raft. We climbed onto them together. His gaze fell to the small rise beneath my cloak. Not greed. Not even awe, reverence. A man remembering that his body is not the only place his life lives. He reached out halting, asking, and when I nodded, he laid his hand where my own had been and closed his eyes as if a prayer. He didn't know the words till I'd finally remembered him. When he looked at me again, there was a break in the king and a door in the man. I was walking toward a vow, he said quietly, and your letter placed a mirror in front of me. I did not like what I saw. I will not finish that walk. They will say you are weak, I said. Not warning. Promise. They already do. A corner of his mouth turned, pained and amused. They mistake mercy for a soft belly. They have never watched mercy go to war. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was hoarding. What now? I will end it, he said. Properly, publicly, without shame, because shame is a lie I refuse to wear. He exhaled. And then I will ask you what future you are willing to let me earn. The words landed inside me and rang like clean metal. Earn, not take, not assume. Earn, I nodded. I will not be a bridge between empires, I said. I will not be a rumor you use when the council sleeps. You will be my home, he answered, simple as water. Footsteps scuffed outside. Priest coughed. The chapel remembered it belonged to the city and not to us. He straightened, king and man weaving themselves back into one body. Will you be there? He asked. For what? When I tell them, he said, at the vows. I am not a spectacle, I said, but I could feel the child roll. And some language older than refusal translated my no into the yes of presence. Not a spectacle, he agreed. A witness. Then I'll stand where stone can see me, I said, and keep my hand steady. He breathed once, like a prisoner tasting outside air. I will come to you after, he said. And if I have anything left that is not true, you may take it from me and throw it to the river. We stood there a moment longer, the way you do when the past is at your back and the future at your feet, and for once, neither asked you to kneel. He lifted my hand and pressed it to his mouth, not kissing listening. Then he turned and went. The city had started to make the sounds of a grand machine spinning up again, drums gathering, bells practicing their joy. I left the chapel and found a place on the temple steps, where a crack in the pillar made a niche just wide enough for a woman to stand and remember her courage. People pressed in around me, hungry for a story that would let them forget themselves. He appeared at the top of the stairs, a lone dot, no veils, no garlands, no smile. The steward's face had learned 3 new ways to panic in the last 10 minutes. A priest hovered, mouth open, a reprimand dying of cold on his tongue. The Alpha King raised his hand. Silence, crisp as winter fruit dot, and though the words had not yet left his mouth, I felt the shape of them move through the crowd, through the stone, through the child's small, stubborn sleeping, a vow refusing to be a lie. His eyes found me one more time, not asking permission, thanking me for the mirror. He spoke. The city listened dot, and when the first murmurs rose, sharp and slicing, I did not flinch. I had already learned the difference between a knife and a key. I set my palm where his had been and waited for the world to become honest. Chapter 6. The ceremony interrupted. The palace bells began to toll long before dawn. Each chime rolled through the city like thunder dressed in silk. Today was the Alpha King's wedding day. The streets glowed with lanterns and ribbons. Every balcony spilled flowers onto the crowd below. I moved among them, unseen, a single shadow in a sea of devotion. The air smelled of perfume, fear, and prophecy. I told myself I wouldn't come here, that I would let fate finish what it had started when my letter slipped away. But my feet had other plans. Something deeper than logic had brought me to the marble steps of the Temple of Moons, the place where kings sealed their vows before gods, before blood, before entire kingdoms. And there, surrounded by cheers, banners, and the shimmer of gold-threaded robes, stood the man I once loved, about to bind his life to another. The ceremony began like a dream I didn't belong to. Priests chanted ancient words. Candles breathed smoke into the vaulted air. The bride, Elise of House Raverin, stood beside him, radiant, untouchable. She was everything a kingdom wanted in a Luna: noble, graceful, empty of scandal. And he, my alpha king, wore the look of a man halfway between pride and damnation. He didn't see me at first. Or maybe he did, but refused to let his eyes linger where the past might drag him under. So I stood at the back of the hall, hands pressed to my cloak, the weight of my unborn child pressing back against my ribs like a heartbeat asking to be heard. The priest's voice rose. Do you, Alpha King of the Eastern bloodline, take Lady Elise as your Luna, bound under the light of the eternal moon? A hush fell over the temple. He inhaled, slow, measured, practiced. The answer trembled behind his lips. And that's when it happened. The moment the gods exhaled, I shifted my weight, a small movement, nothing more. But my satchel, frayed and worn, slipped from my shoulder. It hit the marble floor with a quiet thud. The clasp broke, and from inside, papers spilled like doves startled from a cage. One of them drifted further than the rest, catching the light as it fell. A white sheet edged with silver ink, the healer's report, the one marked with my name. The one stamped with the royal emblem of lineage and life. It slid across the floor, graceful and merciless, coming to rest at his feet. He bent automatically, a reflex trained by years of battle and duty. He picked it up without looking, but fate has a cruel sense of theater. The wind from the open balcony flipped it open in his hands, and then silence, real silence, the kind that erases everything, chance, bells, heartbeats, air. I watched his eyes scan the page once, twice. The color drained from his face. The paper trembled in his fingers. He read the words again, slower this time, as if hoping they would change. They didn't. Patient. Lark of the Northern Pack status. Confirmed pregnancy, 10 weeks, father. Declared Alpha King. Verified through blood trace. The priest hesitated. My king? No response. The bride frowned, confusion curving her perfect mouth. My lord? He looked up, not at her. Not at the priest. At me. Our eyes met across the temple, across 100 witnesses, across a kingdom built on denial. And I knew. He understood everything. The nights, the silence, the letter, the child. His lips parted, but no words came. The crowd began to murmur, a soft ripple that grew louder, sharper, dangerous. The priest tried again. Your Majesty. The vow, but vows meant nothing now. Because truth had already spoken, he took one slow step forward, the report still in his hand. The guards flinched, uncertain if they should protect him or stop him. Who dropped this? He asked quietly. No one answered. Who? His voice cracked like thunder through glass. And then, because I could no longer hide, because the world had already seen, I stepped forward. Every gaze turned toward me. Every whisper became a blade, but his eyes softened, as if the noise no longer mattered. He walked down the aisle toward me, ignoring the protests behind him. Elise called his name, her voice breaking like porcelain. He didn't turn. When he reached me, the crowd held its breath. He stopped just close enough for me to see the tremor in his hand. The paper fluttered between us like the last leaf of autumn. It's true? He asked. I nodded. Yes. You should have told me. I tried. I whispered. The wind told you first. His throat worked around words that wouldn't come. Finally, he whispered, I should have looked harder. The bride sobbed behind us. The council erupted in protest. Guards began to move. Too late. He turned back toward them, his voice clear and heavy as judgment. The ceremony is over. Gasps filled the temple. Your Majesty, cried the high priest. This union binds the realms. Then let them bind themselves, he said, fire in his tone. I will not speak a vow while another waits for me with truth in her hands. The echo of his voice shook the chandeliers. He looked at me again, eyes raw, shining, a man stripped of crown and armor. "You shouldn't have come here," he murmured. "I didn't mean to," I said, "but fate did." The guards parted for him as he walked back toward me, his cloak brushing the marble like a falling banner. The priests tried to continue the ritual, but their voices trembled and died in their throats. Outside, the city waited for a wedding. Instead, it would receive a storm. He stopped beside me at the temple doors. "Come," he said, offering his hand, and though my heart screamed that the world would burn for this, I took it because sometimes destiny doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives, written on paper, sealed in blood, and dropped by fate itself. As we stepped into the sunlight, the bells began to ring again, but not for a wedding, for the death of a lie, and the birth of the truth we had both been running from. Chapter 7. The collapse of a crown chaos does not roar. It begins with whispers. The moment he said, "The ceremony is over," the temple became a living storm. The nobles gasped as if oxygen had betrayed them. The bride's veil fluttered like a wounded bird. And somewhere above, the chandeliers trembled under the weight of disbelief. The Alpha King had undone the world with a single sentence, "Your Majesty." The counselors surged forward, their robes rustling like snakes in grass, but he didn't move. He stood there, my letter clutched in one hand, the medical report in the other, proof of a truth he could no longer deny. Elise cried out his name, but he wouldn't turn. His gaze remained fixed on me, as if I were the only solid thing in a room that had begun to spin. "She carries my child," he said quietly, not as confession, but as declaration. The words struck the air like a blade. The entire temple stilled, the murmurs frozen into silence, and then, as if to prove him right, the wind itself bent through. The open archway swirling around us, the scent of moonlight and iron, the sound of destiny shifting its weight. A priest shouted, "This is blasphemy." Another, "This woman must be removed." Guards moved forward, but he raised his hand. And even soldiers trained for war stopped breathing. "Touch her," he said, "and I will remind you what the word Alpha truly means." Power rippled through the hall. Not the kind born from crowns, the kind born from blood and fury and love. I'd seen him command armies. I'd never seen him command fate itself. The high priest gathered his trembling courage. "My king, this is not only your shame, it is ours. The treaty demands, then let the treaty break," he said. "Let it fall as I have fallen. Let it shatter and let truth rise from its dust." His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the strain of choosing what few kings ever dared. Love over legacy. The bride tore her veil from her head, eyes blazing. "Is this your honor?" she hissed. "To humiliate me before gods and country?" He looked at her, not with anger, but with pity. "No," he said. "My honor is standing where it belongs." And then, to my horror, to my awe, he stepped down from the dais, crossed the marble floor, and stood beside me. The gasps were louder this time. Even the guards looked at one another, uncertain whether to bow or run. He reached for my hand, and the world tilted. "From this moment," he said, loud enough for the crowd, "I will not be bound by vows built on lies. I will not ask the moon to bless a union that hides a heartbeat already blessed by her light." His fingers closed around mine, warm, trembling, human. The man who once chose the throne over me was now choosing me over everything. Behind us, the council broke into chaos. I heard words like treason and scandal thrown around like stones, but above all that noise came the sharp voice of Elise. "You will regret this." "Perhaps," he answered softly, "but I will not forget this." We left the temple hand in hand. The crowd outside had gathered for a wedding. Instead, they witnessed history unravel. Some shouted in confusion. Others fell to their knees in disbelief. And others, women mothers, those who had known loss, began to cheer, a cheer small at first, then growing, echoing down the marble streets. Not for rebellion, not for scandal, for courage. By the time we reached the gates, the sun had dipped low, throwing crimson light over the palace. The soldiers hesitated as we approached, unsure if they were meant to arrest me or salute him. He didn't slow down. He took off his crown, the one forged in bloodline and duty, and placed it in the hands of the captain of the guard. Until my people can see truth without trembling. I am no king, he said. The captain's eyes widened. Sire, you can't. I already have. He turned to me then, voice breaking, softer than prayer. If I have to build a new kingdom to make this right, I will. But not without you. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything. But all I could do was stare at him, at the man who had once left me in silence, now standing in ruin for the chance to hold me again. Tears blurred the city into watercolor. You don't owe me redemption, I whispered. You just owe the truth its voice. Then let this be it, he said. And in that moment, under the blood-red sunset, the Alpha King, no crown, no guards, no veil of duty, dropped to his knees before me. Gasps rose from every corner of the courtyard. Even the banners seemed to still and mutter. Forgive me, he said, eyes glistening, for choosing a crown over you, for making you carry both our burdens alone, for not knowing that love is the only kingdom worth ruling. I reached out, trembling, and touched his face. The same face that once belonged to legend, now human again, breakable mine. You've already been forgiven, I said softly. You just needed to say it out loud. He closed his eyes and leaned into my touch, like a wounded man finally finding home. The crowd fell silent. No priests, no laws, just us. When he rose, he turned to his people, to the kingdom that had watched him fall. A king who cannot honor the truth does not deserve to rule, he said, and a kingdom that punishes love has already lost. The words carried across the plaza, through the towers, into the hearts of those who listened. Some wept, some bowed, some turned away, but no one could say they didn't feel it. As the last light of the day faded, he looked at me again, and for the first time in years, I saw peace in his eyes. He wasn't a king in that moment. He was simply a man standing beside the woman who had survived him, and though the world around us crumbled, something greater was being built in its place, not with marble, but with truth. That night, the city whispered of rebellion. The nobles plotted. The council schemed. But the people, the ordinary souls who lived beneath the banners and bells lit candles outside their homes, not for the wedding that never happened, but for the courage that did. Chapter 8. The confrontation night came too quickly. The palace that once sang with celebration now moaned under the weight of broken vows. Drums had stopped, music had vanished, and the torches that once burned in honor of a royal union flickered like trembling hearts, unsure whether to light the way forward or burn everything behind. We hid in the abandoned chapel by the river, the same one where the truth had been spoken days before. Its windows were cracked, its candles melted to ghosts, but it was ours. Our first sanctuary in a world that no longer had a place for us. He paced near the altar, his coat discarded, his crown nowhere to be found. Outside, I could hear the rumble of voices, councilmen, guards, nobles, all demanding his head or his surrender, and yet there he was. Bare hands, bare soul, bare truth. The man I had once begged the moon to forget was now the one standing between me and the world's fury. They've called an emergency council, he said finally, voice quiet but tight with fire. They're naming me unfit to rule, a man too weak to honor his bloodline. He laughed once, but it wasn't joy. It was disbelief wrapped in exhaustion. They say I betrayed my people, that I threw away peace for a scandal. I stepped closer, resting my hand against the edge of the old wooden pew. Did you? He turned to me, eyes sharp, shining with something between pain and devotion. No, he said. I finally remembered who I am. He came to stand before me, and for a heartbeat, the air between us felt alive, thick, electric, pulsing with everything unspoken. Lark, he said softly, my name trembling on his lips. Why didn't you tell me sooner? The question pierced me. I'd asked myself the same thing 1,000 times in the silence of sleepless nights. I took a breath, the kind that scrapes the throat on its way out. Because you were already gone, I whispered. Because when I found out I was carrying your child, the world had already decided who you belonged to. And I didn't want to make you choose between us. He shook his head. You shouldn't have had to. I shouldn't have had to, I agreed, but I did. Because kings don't get to be human, and I refused to make you one at the cost of your crown. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as the woman he loved, not as the secret he'd left behind, but as the mirror of every mistake he'd ever made. You think I cared more for the crown than for you? He said, voice low, shaking. I don't think, I whispered. I know. That hurt him. I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched. But truth isn't cruelty. It's the medicine that tastes like poison. And yet here you are, he said quietly. And yet here you are, I answered. He exhaled, stepping closer until I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. You're trembling. So are you. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that remembers better days. Then his expression hardened again. They won't stop, Lark. The council. The nobles. The priests. They will come for you first, for both of you. My hand drifted instinctively to my stomach. I know. I can protect you, he said quickly. I can send you across the border before dawn. There's a safe house beyond the western ridge. My father used it during the war. I shook my head. And what will you do? Fight, he said. I laughed bitterly. You can't fight everyone, my king. Then I'll fight the ones who matter. He gripped the edge of the altar, his knuckles pale, his voice rough as stone. They'll paint me as a monster. They'll call you worse. They'll say the child is a mistake. I met his gaze. Then let them. That silenced him. The world might call me many things, a scandal, a sin, a storm, but this child, our child, would never be a mistake. I stepped closer, touching his arm gently. You can rebuild your throne, but not if you keep bowing to people who worship lies. He turned toward me fully then, eyes burning with the kind of love I'd only ever read in myths, the kind that starts wars and ends them. You make me want to burn the whole kingdom, he said softly. Then rebuild it, I whispered. Not with fire, with truth. Outside, the city thundered, soldiers shouting, banners snapping, the voice of a kingdom splitting in half. He leaned his forehead against mine, whispering, if I lose everything, will you still be there? You already did, I said. And I still am. He closed his eyes, as if those words alone had given him breath again. For a long moment, we stood in the stillness between ruin and redemption. Then came the sound of boots. Dozens of them dot the doors, burst open. Light poured in like judgment. A dozen council guards spilled into the chapel, weapons drawn, their leader shouting, by order of the High Council, the former Alpha King is under arrest. He stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between them and me. His voice was a calm blade. Take one more step toward her, he said, and I swear the gods themselves will beg me to stop before you do. The commander hesitated, torn between orders and instinct. Everyone in that room knew one truth. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of king. Stand down. The commander barked at his men, but his voice lacked conviction. You've violated every oath, every law, every lie, the Alpha corrected. Every rule that chained me to a past I should have broken years ago. The commander's eyes flicked toward me, to the gentle curve beneath my cloak. He looked away. Maybe he saw the truth. Maybe he saw his own wife in my place. Either way, he lowered his sword. The soldiers hesitated, but then, one by one, they stepped back. Silence fell again. He turned to me, exhaling shakily. "We have until dawn," he said. "After that, the kingdom will rise against us." "Then we leave before it wakes," I whispered. He nodded. A spark of the warrior he once was lighting his eyes again. "North, to the highlands. There are places even crowns can't find. And after that?" "After that," he said, "we begin again." We left the chapel through the river door, the same way we'd entered our story, quiet, desperate, together. Behind us, the palace bells began to toll again, but this time their song was different, Dot. It wasn't celebration. It was mourning, a requiem for a throne, and as we crossed the bridge into the darkness beyond the city, I looked back one last time at the towers fading behind the mist, at the place where love had been outlawed but refused to die. "You lost your crown," I whispered. "No," he said, slipping his hand into mine. "I finally found it." The river below whispered promises of freedom. The moon followed us like an old friend, and the child, our child, moved for the first time, as if to remind me that even when kingdoms fall, life still rises. Chapter 9. The war between duty and heart dawn crept over the horizon like a bruised apology. The first light of morning painted the rivers in gold and ash, the kind of color that looks like hope from far away but bleeds, like memory up close. We had been walking all night. Our feet were soaked. Our breath came out in small white ghosts. And behind us, somewhere beyond the fog and trees, the sound of horns carried, low and mournful, the song of a kingdom hunting its fallen king. He didn't look back. Neither did I, because to look back was to remember everything we'd already burned. The highlands loomed ahead, jagged and alive, their peaks still hiding beneath mist. The roads turned to dirt, then to mud, then to paths carved only by wolves and the desperate. He carried my bag without asking, though his hands were trembling with exhaustion. I wanted to tell him to rest, but rest was a luxury we no longer owned. "They'll call it treason," I said quietly as we crossed a shallow stream. "They already have," he answered. His voice was steady, but not calm. It was the steadiness of a man holding himself together with sheer will. "And the council will crown a puppet before noon," he said. "One who bows easily, one who forgets quickly." He glanced toward the horizon where the palace towers had once pierced the sky. But crowns built on lies don't last. Lark, they crack faster than truth. We reached the woods by mid-morning. The sun broke through in shards, warm, golden knives cutting through branches. There, for the first time since the ceremony, we stopped. Not because we wanted to, because my body demanded it. The child had grown restless inside me, a small flutter, a reminder that even in flight, life refuses to be silent. He noticed. Without a word, he spread his cloak on the moss and gestured for me to sit. I did. He knelt before me, his fingers brushing against mine, gentle, hesitant, as if afraid the world might break if he touched too much of it at once. "Are you in pain?" he asked softly, only the kind that keeps me alive. A faint smile touched his lips. "Then we're both suffering the same wound." For a while, neither of us spoke. The forest hummed quietly around us, birds calling, wind whispering through pine. I looked at him. Really looked. This wasn't the king I remembered, the one who stood tall in armor, untouchable, cold. This was a man stripped down to the bone, his clothes torn, his crown abandoned, his eyes full of every mistake he'd ever made. And yet, somehow, he'd never looked more like royalty. "You could still go back," I said finally. Tell them I forced you. Tell them it was a lie, that the child isn't yours. They'd forgive you. He turned his head slowly, meeting my gaze. Forgive me? He repeated, voice sharp with disbelief. For loving you? His words burned through the cold air like fire through frost. I am tired of being forgiven for the wrong things, he said. If they want a king who bows to comfort, they can have one. But I will not spend the rest of my life kneeling to regret. I wanted to speak, but he wasn't done. When I took the crown, he continued, I swore to serve my people. I thought that meant serving their silence. But now I see they needed truth more than ceremony. He laughed bitterly. And perhaps I needed you to teach me that. I reached for his hand, tracing the old scars across his knuckles. Truth is a heavy thing to carry. So is a crown, he said. But at least truth doesn't rust. He squeezed my fingers gently. Tell me, Lark, when you look at me now, do you still see a king? I shook my head slowly. No, I said. I see a man finally learning what one should be. The sound of hooves cut through the forest, distant but closing fast. He stood immediately, instinct sharpening his body like a blade. The wolf inside him stirred. They found us, he said. What will you do? He looked down at me, then at the life growing inside me, and smiled faintly. What I should have done long ago, fight for something worth bleeding for. When the soldiers broke through the trees, their armor gleaming like teeth, he didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of me, his stance low. His power coiling in the air, the commander shouted, by order of the council, surrender the woman and the traitor child. That word, traitor, turned the world red. The ground beneath us vibrated. The Alpha's aura unfurled like a storm, invisible but suffocating. The wolves within the soldiers whimpered, recognizing dominance so ancient it made them bow by instinct. That's your king you speak of, he said. Voice low, dangerous. Not anymore, the commander hissed. The council has stripped you of title and right. Then let the moon decide who it belongs to, he growled. He moved like lightning, not the brutal rage of a ruler defending power, but the precise, desperate strength of a man defending love. Every motion was poetry and violence. Intertwined, the sound of metal meeting conviction. Within minutes, 3 soldiers were down, 2 more retreating into the trees. The commander raised his sword again, shouting orders, but then froze, his blade trembling, because the moon had appeared, faint, ghostly, rising too early in the day. A sign, a judgment. The Alpha King lowered his weapon. You see it too, he said quietly. Even the heavens have chosen their side. The soldiers hesitated, and then dropped their blades. When the forest finally went still again, I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. He turned to me, breathing hard, blood on his sleeve, but peace in his eyes. Are you hurt? I shook my head, tears streaking my cheeks. You could have been killed. Then I would have died telling the truth, he said. We made camp by the river that night. He built a small fire, its glow dancing against the scars on his hands. I sat beside him, my back against his shoulder, the rhythm of his heartbeat steady against mine. They'll keep coming, I whispered. Then let them come, he murmured. They can't take what they never gave. He reached out and touched my stomach gently. This is my kingdom now. The night held us in its quiet arms. And for the first time since the chaos began, I wasn't afraid because duty had lost and heart had finally won that chapter. 10. The storm of forgiveness, the storm came without warning. One moment the forest was silent, its stillness thick enough to taste. The next the sky broke open like a confession. Rain fell in sheets, cold and relentless, erasing tracks, washing away the blood on his sleeve, the dust on my boots. The last evidence that we had once belonged to a kingdom. The wind howled through the trees like an angry god, shaking branches until they cracked. Lightning struck the ridge behind us, throwing the world into blinding flashes of white and shadow. We found shelter in the ruins of an old watchtower, stone walls, half collapsed, a roof that leaked but still stood. Inside, it smelled of moss, metal, and memory. He built a fire from what little remained dry, the flame small but brave, flickering stubbornly against the storm. His clothes clung to him, his hair slicked to his forehead. He looked like a man carved from thunder, exhausted, alive, and utterly human. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. Not wild ones, soldiers in pursuit. The sound rolled over the hills, closer each time. He didn't speak for a long while. He just sat by the fire, his hand wrapped around the hilt of his blade, the other trembling slightly where it rested on his knee. I could see the war waging behind his eyes, the pull of duty, the ache of love, the echo of every decision that had brought us here. Finally, he spoke. They won't stop until they have you. Or until they have you, I said quietly. He looked up, the fire reflecting in his eyes. Then they'll find neither. Not alive. I reached across the space between us, my fingers brushing his. His hand closed around mine, rough and warm. I didn't ask you to lose everything for me. I said, you didn't have to ask, he replied. You were the only thing I had left worth keeping. The rain hammered harder. Water dripped from the cracks in the roof, tracing slow paths down the walls like tears. When I was a boy, he said suddenly, voice low, my father told me that a king must love his crown more than his heart. I believed him. I built my entire life on that lie. And then you came, and you showed me what a throne without love feels like. He looked at the fire again, and his next words were barely a whisper, empty. I moved closer. The warmth from the fire reached us both. You were never empty, I said. You were just waiting for something real to fill you. He smiled faintly, that small, tired smile that always carried too much history. And now that it has, the world calls it treason. Then let them, I said. Let the world break if it must. It's already broken enough. A crack of thunder shook the tower. He stood suddenly, pacing near the doorway, looking out into the rain. His shoulders trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of 1,000 what-ifs. You should hate me, he said finally. For leaving you, for making you live in fear, for every night you spent wondering if I'd chosen power over you. I rose slowly, stepping toward him. I did hate you, I said. For a time. For every letter I didn't send. For every heartbeat that felt too loud in the silence you left. But hatred is just love that hasn't found its forgiveness yet. He turned to me, his eyes glistening. And have you found it? I nodded, double quotes, yes, I had to. Our child deserves a story that begins with forgiveness, not revenge. He breathed out shakily and pressed his forehead against mine. The smell of rain and fire and him filled the air between us. I don't deserve this, he murmured. Then earn it, I whispered. Not for me, for yourself. Lightning flashed again, turning the world silver. In that brief light, I saw the truth of him. A man stripped of titles, a warrior bent but unbroken, a king learning to kneel not in submission, but in love. The howls came again, closer this time. Through the doorway, faint shapes moved between the trees, armor glinting, torches flaring. He pulled back, jaw set. They found us. I grabbed his hand. We can't run forever. We won't, he said. Not this time. He stepped into the rain, sword drawn, the storm lighting his path. I followed, not out of bravery, but because love leaves no room for cowardice. The soldiers emerged from the mist, dozens of them. At their head, the same commander we had faced before, Alpha. He shouted over the storm. Lay down your weapon. The council demands your surrender. Then tell the council, he called back, to look me in the eyes and say they've never sinned for love. The commander hesitated, his men restless behind him. The rain soaked everyone equally, kings, Rebels, traitors, lovers. A sudden crack split the air, not thunder but horns. From the ridge above, more riders appeared, not soldiers of the council, but commoners. Men and women from the border villages, from the city streets, from the very heart of the kingdom he'd once ruled. They carried no banners, only torches. "Your Majesty," a woman shouted. "We saw what you did. You chose love over lies. We'll stand with you." The commander turned, eyes wide. "This is treason." "No," she said. "This is truth." The Alpha lowered his sword slowly, the rain streaming down his face. He looked at me, soaked, breathless, alive, and whispered, "Forgiveness has found its voice." He stepped forward, raising his hands for all to see. "I am no longer your king," he said, his voice ringing through the rain. "But I am still your protector. I will not fight you, my people. I will not kill what I was born to love." The commander stared at him, then dropped to one knee. One by one, the soldiers followed. The torches flickered, their light merging with the storm, and just like that, the war ended before it began. Not with blood, but with forgiveness. He turned to me, his hand finding mine. "I thought strength meant never breaking," he said. "But maybe true strength is knowing when to bend." "Then bend with me," I whispered. He smiled, that same quiet, trembling smile that belonged only to the man beneath the crown. We stood together in the rain, surrounded by those who had come to destroy us, now kneeling, not to a king, but to the truth. The storm raged on, but its fury no longer frightened me, because storms don't destroy love. They reveal it. Chapter 11. The luna's mark at dawn. The storm broke like a fever. Clouds thinned into pale silk. The rain softened to a benediction. We stood in a clearing rimmed with pine, hands entwined. The people and soldiers who had nearly hunted us now gathered in a rough circle wet, watchful, breathing the same uncertain hope. No banners, no trumpets, only faces. He squeezed my fingers once, a quiet question. "Yes," I said, before he could ask. "If this is the path you choose, we walk it together." He turned, lifting his voice not as a king demanding obedience, but as a man offering truth. "Hear me," he called, and the woods leaned in to listen. "I left a throne yesterday. I did not leave my people. I will not hide behind forests or rumors. Come with us into the city so that the truth is not a whisper in trees, but a bell rung in daylight." A murmur of assent moved through the ring. Even the commander, rain damp and humbled, nodded. He looked at me, and I saw in his eyes the smallest, brightest kind of change. A soldier remembering. He had a heart before he had a rank. We walked. Not triumph's march, something gentler. A procession of second chances. By the time the outer gates of the capital rose, the streets had begun to fill first with skeptics, then with the curious, then with the brave. Word travels faster than any horse when it rides the ribs of gossip and prayer. Shopkeepers leaned on door frames, flour dusting their sleeves like snowfall. Children darted ahead and doubled back, narrating our arrival with breathless importance. Old women pressed rosaries of bone and twine into our palms, as if love needed charms. Perhaps it did. We stopped at the temple steps where the lie had nearly been made law. The marble was still slick with storm, the great doors ajar as if the building itself were undecided. The council had arrayed itself like a chess problem under the portico robes dried hastily, rings bright, eyes sharper than polished steel. Elise stood among them, unveiled, pale as the underside of a leaf. I felt no triumph in seeing her pain, only an ache, tender and honest, for the way we all had been bent to serve stories we didn't write. He released my hand and stepped forward until he stood on the bottom stair, the lowest stone. "The humblest place. I have words," he said. "You have none," snapped the High Counselor. "You have forfeited speech along with crown. He lifted a palm, not commanding silence, inviting it. I have forfeited nothing that matters. I have only given back what I should never have taken, a vow spoken without the truth beside it. A restless sound moved through the crowd, a tide turning. The counselor gestured, oily and precise. You shame this city. You shame the moon. You shame the order that keeps wolves from tearing throats in the dark. He glanced at me, then at the faces beyond. If your order lives only by silencing love, it is not a law. It is a leash. A woman's voice rose from the onlookers then, fierce. Let them speak the mark. 100 others took up the call without knowing what it meant, only that their mouths had been hungry to say anything but the old script. The counselor's lips pinched. There will be no ritual. You are deposed. Then we'll have the only ceremony that cannot be deposed, he said softly, turning to me. A mark is not a crown. It is a promise. I climbed the first stair to stand beside him, my step sure, my breath even. The city held still. Even sparrows quit their small arguments to listen. He knelt not the kneel of a ruler conferring favor, the kneel of a man laying his weapon down. My Luna, he said, his voice edged and bright with awe and apology. If you accept me, it will not be as property or prize. It will be as equal. Before these witnesses and whatever gods dare to watch, I ask to bear your mark as I bear my scars, with gratitude for what saved me and humility for what it cost. Gasps, soft as moth wings. A power shifted something old and stubborn, and the stones took note. Did not reach for his shoulder the way tradition prescribed. I reached for his face because tradition had never mattered less. Stand with me, I said. No more kneeling unless we kneel together. He rose. We turned so that temple and council and city could see us clearly. I lifted his left wrist, the one he guarded in battle without thinking. The memory hand and bared the skin where pulse wrote its private poem. Once, I said not loudly, but the words carried, you marked me with absence, and I wore it like iron. Today I mark you with presence, and you will wear it like light. A midwife had given me a small bone blade the week I came to the river, pressed into my palm with a look only women learn to give for the life you're choosing. I drew it now, not to wound, but to write. I scored the skin lightly enough to bead, not to bleed, and pressed my thumb to the welling red. Moon? Witness, I said. He exhaled, a sound like a man surfacing. Then he took my right wrist in his hands, gentle, asking, and repeated the right. When his thumb warmed my skin, I felt both of us become suddenly exquisitely real. Not rumor, not spectacle. Human vows, human blood. People, he said, and his voice was almost tender enough to break. Witness. Silence gathered itself into a shape I recognized. Reverence uncoerced. It lasted a heartbeat, two then fractured into the most fragile, beautiful noise a city can make, soft cheering that grows because it dares to. The counselor banged his staff. Illicit, unratified, void. Ratify this, came a voice from the soldiers, our commander, no longer hiding himself inside rank. He stepped forward and, in full view of his men, pressed his fist to his heart in the old pledge older than councils. I'll follow a man who chooses truth in daylight. Others followed, a baker still dusted white, a seamstress with pins like constellations at her cuff, a priest who had remembered mercy before memorization. A dozen, then scores, then hundreds, hands lifted to hearts, throats humming the low note of agreement. Elise moved then, down one stair, then another, stopping 3 below us close enough that I could see the crack running through the armor of her poise. You've made me your villain, she said to me, not a hiss, not a howl. A simple line carved with pain. Do you understand what you have taken? I met her gaze and did not look away. I won't offer you pity, I answered. But I will offer you honesty. If he had married you, your marriage would have been a prison neither of you deserved. I did not take a crown from your head. I removed a chain from your throat. She flinched as if struck, then straightened with an effort that made me like her. Then let the chain fall, she said. But do not pretend there is no bruise. No, I said softly. I won't. Something eased in her shoulders, nothing like forgiveness yet, but the angle where forgiveness might one day fit without scraping bone. She turned back to the council with a new, dangerous grace. If you need a scapegoat, find another field. The counselor's mouth opened, then closed. Power, real power, had already left his hands and gone to live where it always should have. Among us, he tried again, louder. You have no crown. There can be no Luna without a king. He looked at me, waiting to see if the old grammar would shame me into shrinking. It didn't. I lifted my marked wrist. There is a Luna when there is a woman who chooses to protect, to nurture, to lead, whether or not a man wears metal on his head. A ripple of laughter delighted moved across the steps. The Alpha smiled, and the city watched a miracle so simple it barely needed a god. A man pleased to see a woman keep her own shape. He stepped up one stair, not to rise above me, but to stand at my side on the same level, a visible choice. I relinquished my crown, he said, turning to the people, because it had become a wall between me and truth. If you ask me to take it again, I will accept it only on one condition, that you understand what it means now. It means I kneel first. It means I answer to the smallest cry before the loudest counsel. It means no treaty is written with a woman's body as signature. It means the child we carry will be born into a world where promises are kept with hands, not pageantry. He looked to me requests, not presumption. I gave the smallest nod. The world tilted into a better axis. Then speak the choosing, the commander called, half ceremony. Half dare, the city found its voice. I choose, said the baker. I choose, said the seamstress. I choose, said the priest. Tears making tracks through ashdot voices, layered rough, bright, broken. Brave until the sound became a single body humming with consent. The counselor's staff struck marble in a last, petulant crack. This has no precedent. Then will be the precedent, the Alpha said. Let today be the story our children tell when they ask what love is made of. He turned to me again, and the chaos receded until only his face remained. The familiar, the strange, the beloved. May I? He asked, a small, wondering gesture toward my belly. Always, I said. He knelt not to me this time, but to the life between us, and pressed his marked wrist to the curve of my dress. His voice went lower than prayer. Little one, he said, I chose wrong yesterday and learned. I'll choose right today and keep choosing. I will fail and try again. I will fight only the battles that protect, never the ones that impress. I will be the first to apologize and the last to leave. You will never be a secret I'm proud of, you will be a truth I'm honored by. The child answered him with a flutter so delicate I could have missed it if I hadn't been made. In that instant, entirely of listening, tears blurred the steps into soft white rivers. The city whose ears are usually lined with coin heard something more valuable and went quiet to keep from frightening it. When he stood, the priest who had remembered mercy cleared his throat, gentle. There is a blessing older than our books, he said, stepping forward. No robes needed. He lifted his hands in the shape of a cradle and spoke in the river's cadence. Moon above, river below, witness the mark freely given, the truth freely spoken, the home freely built. What is bound by fear unbind. What is bound by love keep. Amen, said the baker, who had never been to temple a day in her life. It should have ended there soft, perfect. Life rarely lets endings be tidy. A crack of hooves on stone. A clutch of late loyalists shouldered through the edge of the crowd young, cocky scent of steel. Their captain raised a standard none of us had seen since the old wars. Black Wolf, Red Eye. Seize them, he barked. By mandate of no, said Elise, stepping neatly between us and the blades. Her voice was a line you could not cross and keep your dignity. There will be no more humiliations enacted in my name. The young captain sneered. You are nothing without this union. She tilted her chin. Then I am nothing and still more than your mandate. The commander from the forest moved to her side. Stand down, he told the boys, tired, warm, like a father reminding sons where home is. Look, they looked not at crowns or councils, at wrists marked in blood and blessing. At a woman who refused to swallow poison simply because it was served on a silver spoon. At a city choosing its future out loud. One by one, their bravado cracked. A few even flushed the miserable red of remembered conscience. The captain lowered the standard. Its fabric kissed wet stone and lay there. Tamed into cloth again, a cheer burst not wild, but relieved. Like the sigh that follows a fever finally breaking, he turned to me. Not triumphant, grateful. There will be laws to unlearn, he said quietly. Doors to widen. Apologies to make that have names and faces. We'll make them, I said. One by one. He nodded toward the temple. There's one left for me to make now. We climbed together, not to the altar, but to the threshold where inside and outside meet. He faced Eliz, and the crowd softened around the three of us, curiosity yielding. For a rare and holy moment to respect. I'm sorry, he told her. Not for choosing differently, only for choosing slowly. I should have ended the lie before it dressed itself as a wedding. She studied him, seeing past titles to the flawed animal asking to be decent. Don't mistake this for forgiveness, she said. I won't, he answered. Forgiveness is work. I'll do mine. She inclined her head, the smallest royal gesture, the most human consent. Then start by making sure the girls after me don't have to do what I did. I will, he said. We descended to the square bathed in rinsed light. People pressed around us with offerings humble as bread and lithe as songs. A child thrust a garland at me, then, flustered, redirected and hung it around my belly. The city laughed not at him, but with the joy of watching innocence discover is allowed. Where do we go now? I asked not because I didn't know, but because the answer deserved to be spoken. Home, he said. And where is that? The priest teased, eyes bright. He looked at our interlaced fingers, at the people, at the washed steps. Wherever truth sleeps without flinching, he said. Wherever this life wakes to hands that are ready. The commander coughed, unexpectedly shy. He stopped himself, started again. My friends, there's the small matter of governance. Someone must hold the line while we rewrite it. The crowd murmured. He turned to them, not breaking our joined hands. Choose a steward, he said. Not a king. Someone to keep the books and mend the roads and listen more than he speaks until the laws remember what they're for. Christ rose names, ideas, laughter as jokes were tossed and caught. In the end, they chose the baker. Of course they did. Who else understands hunger so well? She sputtered, then squared herself like bread set to rise. I'll do it, she said, but only if you lot promise to complain directly instead of whispering in alleyways. The city roared its delight. We walked away, then not far. Not fast down into the narrower streets where laundry strung between windows turned sky into patchwork. Where the river's talk returns, where a lantern maker's wife will always know the news before the heralds do. Hands brushed us, not to clutch, but to bless. A girl with gapped teeth practiced my name in a whisper to see if it tasted like hers. It did. By the time we reached the old chapel, the sun had come fully through. He paused at the door and looked up at its poor, beloved roof. Witness again? He asked it, smiling. Inside, we lit exactly 2 candles, enough to say thank you. not enough to make the room pretend to be a court. We stood in the aisle where everything had started and ended and started again. He drew a breath. "One more vow," he said, and looked as if he were about to ask me to build a palace. Not to be better than I am, that's a lie men tell before they fail, but to be exactly who I say, even when no one's watching. "I'll hold you to it," I said. "And if I break it," he asked, "will you leave?" "No," I said. "I'll make you speak the breaking out loud and start again. That's how we'll last." He kissed my marked wrist light, reverent, then rested it against the place where our child had begun to make room. The small life turned beneath my skin like a page in a wind that knows its destination. In that movement, I felt the measure of everything, what we had lost, what we had found, and the part that cannot be measured at all, dash grace dot, when we step back into the day. The city met us not with trumpets, but with work. Someone needed water hauled. Someone needed a quarrel settled. Someone had baked bread too dark and was giving it away warm to anyone who didn't mind a little char. "Perfect," he murmured. And I understood this was the throne he wanted. We crossed the square slowly, greeting the ordinary as if it were sacred, because it is. The baker knew steward stood on a crate, already assigning gutters to boys who thought themselves above gutters and smiling when they forgot to argue. The commander untied his sword belt and hung it on a hook outside his door, as easily as one hangs a coat when weather has turned a man deciding he had done enough for steel that day. The priest swept the temple steps with his own hands. The counselor had gone. Elise was nowhere in sight, some departures. I have learned are the purest gifts a day can give Dot as afternoon eased into the buttery hour. He guided me to a bench at the river's edge, the same plank, I think, upon which I had once promised myself I would disappear. We sat, we breathed. A Huron took precise, priestly steps through the shallows and pretended not to notice us. "Do you think they'll remember this day as a scandal or a beginning?" He asked. "Yes," I said, and we both laughed, the kind of laugh that stitches a ragged thing close. He grew quiet. "In the morning," he said, "we'll go to the midwife with the steady hands. We'll build a list, cribs, blankets, names." He glanced sideways, sideways again, the way boys do when they are trying on joy and fear at the same time. "Have you thought of any?" I had. I had a dozen some that tasted like mountain, some like river, some like sky. I kept them for myself a heartbeat longer, then offered one simple as bread. He rolled it in his mouth and smiled as if he had found a home built into a word. When the first stars arrived as shy as late guests, he stood and pulled me easily, not urgently, into the square's light. People were dancing, not the steps taught by courts, but the ones learned in kitchens and fields. He bowed with comical formality that made the children giggle and the grandmothers preen. I accepted, because refusing happiness when it finally asks for your hand is a sin I will not commit again. We moved together, careful of my breath, careful of the small life, careless of anyone's opinion. Laughter, heel scrapes, claps off beat. The city spun around us like a necklace of mismatched beads, and far up, the moon woke full and unafraid. She shone on our wrists and said nothing at all. Which is how you know a blessing means it. When we were too tired to pretend we weren't, we stopped. He touched his brow to mine, tender as the first time. "Luna," he said, and the word was not a title. It was my name, recently discovered. "Alpha," I answered, and met man. The river kept murmuring, and the night kept warming. And somewhere an old bell that had not rung for joy in years remembered how. It sounded once, just once, as if to say, "Write this down. I have. Tomorrow there will be work. There will be petitions and laws to unlearn, and hands to hold steady while they realize they can let go. There will be, too, a life to bring into a world we are making gentler by speaking its truth out loud. But tonight there is this, a mark where absence used to live, a promise we know how to keep. A city learning to be brave in ordinary ways. He laced our fingers again as if finishing a sentence. Home, he said. Home. I agreed. Dot and the moon, indifferent and kind, climbed higher witness and keeper while we walked the short. Sweet distance between ruin and everything after. Dot, chapter 12. Our beginning after the end. The moon was full again when the world decided to forgive itself. Dot. It had been 6 months since the day the city chose truth over spectacle, since crowns became lighter and hearts heavier in the best way. The palace bells no longer tolled for rulers. They sang for newborns, for harvests, for laughter echoing down streets once built to silence joy. And me. I had learned to walk without fear. The house we built sat on a hill just outside the city walls, close enough to see the river shimmer, far enough to hear the world breathe. The walls were made of stone and sunlight. The door never locked. And in the garden, small blue flowers grew along the path. The kind, he said, reminded him of the morning I first forgave him. He spent his days rebuilding the council into something worthy of the word honor. Number. More thrones, just round tables where every voice carried the same weight. The baker still served as steward, a crown of flour dusting her hair each day. Even Elise, once his would-be bride, now led the trade guilds, strong, steady, no longer angry. Only free. Dot, and when the world asked what became of the Alpha King who lost his throne for love, the answer was simple. He became something better. He became a man. I woke before dawn most mornings. The child within me had grown restless as the moon grew bright, a rhythm, a promise. He always rose with me, as if some instinct told him when I could no longer bear the waiting alone. We would walk to the river together. He would bring the same cup each time, carved from wood, worn smooth by years of use. He'd fill it, hold it up to the sky, and say, "For truth." And I'd answer, "For tomorrow." That had become our ritual, our way of remembering that love, once broken, could still be whole again. The night it happened, the air was soft and silver. The stars hung low, patient and kind. He lit every candle in the house, pacing, pretending not to worry, pretending not to count my breaths. When the first cry filled the room, it didn't sound like pain. It sounded like freedom. I laughed and wept all at once. And when he placed her in my arms, our daughter, I felt the world tilt and settle again. She had his eyes, my mouth, the quiet of both of us. Dot. He knelt beside me, pressing his forehead to hers. "Welcome home, little moon," he whispered. Dot. We named her Lyra, after the constellation that sings even in silence. For weeks, the house filled with visitors bringing gifts we didn't need, but love we did. The baker brought warm bread. Eli sent silk. The soldiers carved a wooden wolf to guard her cradle. Even the priest came with a blessing and a joke about learning to pray to honesty instead of idols. Dot. And every night, when the city lights dimmed and the wind hummed through the fields, he would sit by the window, Lyra in his arms, humming the lullaby he used to sing to me in the wilds, the same one that once kept me from giving up. One evening, as the moon rose high and round, I found him outside, the child asleep against his chest. He looked up, smiling. "She'll never know the world we came from," he said softly. "The kind that made love a sin. She'll only know what we teach her," I said. "That truth is sacred. That kindness is power. That forgiveness is freedom." He brushed a strand of hair from my face, and that her mother saved her father before she was even born. I laughed, leaning against him. "You saved yourself. I just showed you where to look." The wind picked up, cool, playful, and the moon dipped low, laying its silver mark across our garden, across our joined hands. Across the child who slept between us. Dot. The city bells rang once, a single, clear note that drifted through the valley like a heartbeat. Dot. No crowns, no vows, just peace. Years would pass. The city would grow. Our story would fade into legend, told not as tragedy, but as testimony. They would say the Alpha King laid down his crown for love, and the woman who carried his child taught him how to be whole. But I know the truth. It wasn't the fall that changed us. It was the choosing, over and over, to love, to forgive, to begin again. Now, when the night grows quiet and Lyra's laughter fades into dreams, I step outside and whisper to the sky, we are here. We are home. We are more than the ending. The moon listens, bright, endless, smiling, and somewhere beyond the light, I swear I hear the echo of his first vow, spoken long ago and still true now. You are my kingdom, my crown, and my peace.